Hi, everyone, and welcome back. My name is Judith Silverman Hodara of Fortuna Admissions. I'm here with Jody Keating, who is our in-house resume doctor. I'm really excited to have the chance to talk with Jody this morning about resumes and length and what needs to go in, really thinking about format. And Jody just said something really interesting to me, which is essentially one page for every 10 years of experience, which I think is a great model to use. So Jody, I'm going to toss it to you, and we talk a little bit about what needs to go on that page, how long is too long, and whether or not you should use colored ink.
No, no colored ink. There's your answer. I think, if really a one-page resume is what you're looking at to apply to business school, I think unless, again, if you've been out of school, of undergrad, more than 10 years, which is very unusual for an MBA candidate, you can think about a second page. If a school does allow more than one page, some do, some say 2 pages is okay, you want to be careful to include everything that's most important on that first page. There's no guarantee anyone's going to read the second page, even if it's allowed. So if you really can't get it to one page, make sure your second page is stuff that you want to get on there, but it's not necessarily your strongest list of assets. This is very hard for a lot of people and a lot of professional resumes as well. It's hard. People have done a lot of great stuff. There's a lot of good work that you can't put on a resume sometimes because you just don't have space. I think it's hard to choose the most significant pieces of impact. And it's frustrating because sometimes you spend a lot of your time at work on a certain project or a task. And it's like 60% of how you spend your day, and it's not on your resume because it isn't impactful. It's stuff that is expected of your job that the company needs you to do to function, but it has no business on a resume because it was what you were supposed to be doing. And
Right.
so instead, right. And that's really frustrating for people to think, but this whole thing I spend all my time on isn't even on here. But the point of the resume isn't to show everything that you've ever done. It's to show key examples of impact. And even if it's one project you spent 2 weeks on, but it was big and it made the company a lot of money, or you traveled to China to do it, or something unique about it, that goes on the resume over due diligence, which you may have spent, maybe the bulk of your time on. So that can be really frustrating. Less is always more. If you can cut the length, I would do it. And I would sacrifice unique formatting choices. You mentioned colored ink.
You're putting that delicately.
Your name doesn't have to be in 24-point font. They know your name. That can shrink. The headers can be smaller. Just think of creative ways to use the space so that as much as possible is dedicated to the content. Style is not as important in this way because, again, people are looking at a lot of these.
Home address, no home address. Can you just put email and phone? Like what?
These days, yes. Email and cell phone is plenty. In the old days, they would send you sometimes like letters. Believe it or not, when I was in school, we would get invitations to recruiting events in the mail. It's very exciting. I guarantee no one's doing that anymore, probably. So I think an email and a cell phone, use an email that you check a lot would be helpful. It can be your work email, but it also is okay if you're kind of on the down low and need a different email. That's okay. Just make sure you're checking it pretty often because sometimes they may have a follow-up and you don't want to ignore that.
What about how far back in time you should go on your resume? I know, like, I sometimes will look at a resume of a candidate that I'm working with, and SAT scores are on there.
Yeah.
And the fact that they were high school valedictorian, and I kind of think that's great, but not so relevant. Can you talk about that?
Like Wharton or Harvard or Columbia, a lot of people are going to have that same level of high school performance. So our general advice is to start with your undergraduate education. Start with when you left for undergrad. Start there. The trick is you don't want to have any gaps in your timeline. So if you came out of college and you waited tables for 6 months, or you traveled and you didn't work, or you did something that maybe you're not thrilled is on your, it's not your biggest accomplishment, but it's something you did to fill time, you can always just list it without any bullets. You can just put the title and the company and the dates so that it doesn't look like you're hiding anything.
Got it.
But you don't have to list bullets for those early positions. That's an easy way to save space. Is just put the title. I worked at Bennigan's for a year because, whatever. Then you get on to the good stuff. But that way there's no gap because something missing is a flag. And so that's a tricky one when you're trying to save space. Internships is another good question. If you had a lot of internships while you were in college, you don't have to include them all, believe it or not.
Right.
If that's a huge time user of space, space, hog, if you will. But I would include at least one with a unique brand or in the field that your application story is saying that you want to be in post-graduation.
Mm-hmm.
If your internships were at banks and you want to shift and go into consumer goods, maybe just include one to show that you had them. They could also be bullets in your undergraduate experience as well, which saves a lot of space. But that's a tough one too.
So I've had those kinds of questions before, lots of internships or
Mhm.
what do I do? I did something for 4 months and I don't really know where to put it. But that's a great answer. And I should, start to tell candidates that, like, just put the title, the date, and move on. Along that question about dates, month and year or just year?
Oh, that's a really good question. That's a very good
I
question.
get asked that probably twice a
Everybody,
week.
yeah. There's no right or wrong. My personal preference is just years because you can be less specific, but also
Right.
still be accurate. And so if you did have 2 months off because you got sick or something happened, you don't have to highlight that. You don't ever want to lie about it if it comes up,
Sure.
but you don't have to be so specific. If you did have small gaps of a month or 6 weeks, which happens, even if you were promoted, sometimes you took a month off to do whatever. It just leaves it cleaner to just do years. Most resumes I see do months though, and that's okay. But then you have to really be careful to make sure that if one job ended in October, the next one started in November.
And I also just think visually, it's a lot more on the page, and it's kind of hard to. I find it a distraction.
Yeah, that's my personal preference as well. I don't always correct it for folks. If you've been promoted a few times within the company, sometimes years don't show that. Like 3 different jobs will say 2011 or 12.
Right.
Sometimes months are easier to show advancement within a company because sometimes you only held the job for 9 months or something and then you were promoted. So there are exceptions, but years are it's enough. It's enough. You don't have to be that specific. Again, you have limited attention. If someone's doing the math to figure out, hold on, how many months were they at each job, then they're not spending time reading the other stuff, which is better.
Right, which I hadn't thought about. You really want them focused on the content, not on like seeing if all the months line up.
And there's a lot of readers that are going to look at that timeline for continuity. That's the first thing they're going to do.
Right.
So you can make that faster, then they'll get to the rest.
Thank you so much for some terrific insights this morning. Again, I'm Judith Silverman Hodara, Fortuna Admissions. So glad I had the opportunity to talk with Jody Keating, our in-house resume doctor. And we look forward to speaking with you again soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you.